Kinesiological Analysis of Kicking a Penalty Kick by Ashlynn and Sydney Egendoefer.
The primary purpose of this skill is force is transferred to the ball during the forward swing of the non-weight-bearing limb. This transfer of force sends the ball into the back of the net.
So for the movement phases, there are three main phases. These consist of the wind-up, force phase, and follow-through phase. And this consists of 6 sub-phases: the approach, foot planting, cocking of the kicking leg, swing, ball contact, and follow-through.
This type of skill is considered a crash because of the contact made with the ball by the moving body part, which is the swing leg. This movement can be classified as the action of an athlete using the force made through the simultaneous sequential movement of the body to strike the ball as the player uses its muscles to swing through the ball. This uses gross motor skills, and it would be considered a closed motor skill.
The simultaneous sequential nature of the movement is the continuous movement of the body parts that allow the athlete to generate acceleration and force. As the support leg is planting next to the ball, the swing leg is cocked back, meaning the hip is hyperextended for this motion while the knee is bent in flexion. As the hip is moving towards flexion and the knee is moving towards extension, it is a simultaneous sequential movement because these movements of the body parts together generate the acceleration and force needed to strike the ball.
The joints and segment motions involved in this movement are the hip, knee, and ankle joints. The glutes and the hamstrings are the main muscles controlling motion of the hip during the kick. Other muscles involved in this action are the hamstrings, quadriceps, and calf muscles. The core muscles are also used for stability during the kick.
Anatomical principles related to effective and safe performance. Using a proximal distal motion of the lower limb segments, angular velocity is used by the thigh, knee, and then the foot. To produce greater velocity, athletes should approach the ball at a 45-degree angle as kicking leg leaves. As athlete prepares for shot and makes effort, the muscles begin firing in order to produce the best kick possible.
The first phase is the wind-up phase. During the wind-up phase, the hips, knees, and ankles are involved in this motion. The hip of the kicking leg starts in extension and stays in extension for the remainder of this phase. The segment that is being moved is the leg. The force of moving is the muscle contraction, while the main muscles used for force are the glutes and hamstrings. This contraction type is concentric contraction. The knee starts in flexion and moves to extension while moving the lower leg. The force is muscle contraction that comes from the hamstrings, and this is a concentric contraction. The ankle starts in plantar flexion and moves to dorsiflexion during this phase. The segment that is moved is the foot, and the force for moving is muscle contraction. The main muscles used are plantar flexors, and it is concentric contraction.
During the force phase, the hips, knees, and ankles are also involved in this motion. The hip of the kicking leg starts in extension and moves to flexion during this phase. The segment that is being moved is the leg. The force of moving is momentum, gravity, and muscle contraction of the hip flexors. This contraction type is concentric contraction. The knee starts in flexion and moves to extension while moving the lower leg. The force is also known as gravity, momentum, and muscle contraction of the quadriceps and adductors. This is also a concentric contraction. The ankle starts in plantar flexion and stays in plantar flexion throughout contact with the ball during this phase. The segment that is moved is the foot, and the force for moving is gravity, momentum, and muscle contraction of the gastrocnemius and soleus. This is also a concentric contraction.
The final phase of this motion is the follow-through phase. During the follow-through phase, the hips, knees, and ankles are also involved in this motion. The hip of the kicking leg starts and ends in flexion during this phase. The segment that is being moved is the leg. The force of moving is momentum, gravity, and muscle contraction of the hip flexors. This contraction type is eccentric contraction. The knee starts and ends this phase in extension, moving the lower leg. The force is also gravity, momentum, and muscle contraction of the hip flexors. This is an eccentric contraction. The ankle starts in plantar flexion, and as the follow-through phase happens, the ankle moves to dorsiflexion. The segment that is moved is the foot, and the force for moving is gravity, momentum, and muscle contraction of the gastrocnemius and soleus. This is an eccentric contraction.
There are many mechanical objectives to this motion. First, the direction in which the ball moves is determined by direction of the plant foot and direction of the force applied. Second, momentum is conserved in the collision. Third, any change in momentum of colliding objects is related to the force and duration of the collision. The greater the velocity of the approaching ball, the greater the velocity of the ball in the opposite direction. The greater velocity of the striking implement at the moment of contact, the greater the velocity of the struck ball. The greater the mass of the ball, the greater its velocity after being struck. The greater the mass of the striking implement, the amount of muscle used, the greater its velocity after being struck. The direction taken place by the ball is determined by the direction of the planting foot is facing, the relation of the striking force from the striking leg to the ball, and the degree of constant firmness of ankle through the entirety contact with the ball.
The nature of forces causing or impeding the motion are as follows. Kicking is a momentary contact. When the striking leg comes in contact with the ball has to overcome air resistance in order to start moving. As it starts to fly into the air resistance is the impeding force of the motion. The striking leg also experiences air resistance. Friction is another force that is involved in the motion. The planting foot experiences friction to help them stand in place and keep balance while striking the ball. Gravity also impedes the motion because when the ball is kicked into the air, the gravity brings the ball back down. Gravity also helps to pull the striking leg down back towards the ball as the hip is moving to flexion and swinging through the kick. Another force that causes the motion is the player needs to use the right amount of force in order to shoot the ball to the right target.
Newton's laws that apply to this motion. First, the law of inertia. Every object in a state of motion remains in that state unless an external force is applied to it. The ball tends to stay in motion once it is kicked until the gravity and wind bring the ball to the ground. As the player runs, he or she applies enough force to the ground to overcome his own weight and gravity until gravity overcomes it. Next, the law of acceleration. A force applied to a body causes an acceleration of that body of a magnitude proportional to that force, in the direction of the force and inversely proportional to the body's mass. The ball being kicked, gravity is a force that pushes the body forward, known as gravitational torque. Force applied by the muscles. Force overcomes player's weight and gravity. Lastly, the law of motion. Newton's third law tells us that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction, meaning that the longer and greater a force is applied to the ground by the support leg, the greater applied to the ball on contact, resulting in greater power and acceleration.
Ready. Now, this is a video of a non-experienced kicker. The violations from this video of the mechanical principles would be the direction of the planting foot and the direction of force applied. There was a change in momentum of the kicking leg colliding with the ball during the kick. It was not a consistent motion. There was also not a constant firmness of the ankle throughout the kick. This caused the ball to travel to the left because of the equal and opposite reaction law. Overall, the errors that were made in this video was the striking foot was averted, the ankle was not kept locked, and the ball was hit with the inner part of the foot. The player also approached from straight on.
Ready.
The sources for error was that the athlete has never played soccer. She was told to shoot a PK from the PK spot, and she did not approach or kick the ball successfully when comparing to the correct principles of shooting a soccer ball.
Prescriptions for improvement. The athlete should point her toe and strike the ball with her laces. Her trunk should be leaning over the ball. The planting foot should plant and then the striking foot hits the ball. She should have enough momentum that they should land on their striking foot. She should continue momentum and decelerate once following through. And she should abduct her hip in the force phase.
Thanks for watching.